Good morning. This is the Mentoring Systems Involved Youth. Where do we go from here? Session, and um, something has been changed here. Today we are going to have a moderator with Troy Brown, who is the Assistant Director of the State Judicial Branch, Court Support Services. He is the Director of the Training Academy and Multicultural Unit, and in charge of the strategic plan to promote cultural competence by planning and implementing, coordinating their cultural responsiveness initiatives. My name is Jo Hawke. I am a program manager at the Governor's Prevention Partnership, and we will have panelist Landry from Guilford Youth and Family Services, Ron Huggins who is a youth development coordinator, the City of New Haven, Youth and Recreation, the mentoring director of children's community programs, Patricia Nicolari, Stephan Palmer, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Youth on Fire from Hartford, and Sergeant Ryan Bassett of the Police Activity League of Waterbury. Before we start, I'm going to give a little bit of information about the housekeeping. First of all, this session is 45 minutes long, so we'll be trying to move along fairly quickly. We will have a question and answer section at the end of the session if we have time. We are also recording this and we'll make it available at the end of the summit. So I wanted to start by giving a little bit of background. First of all, about the promise of mentoring for systems involved youth. Juvenile justice involvement is associated with a variety of negative outcomes for youth and life circumstances, including alcohol and drug use, family violence, poor school performance, associating with delinquent peers. And we believe, and the literature shows, that providing the support of a caring adult role model has the potential to change the trajectory of a youth's life. But when we look at the effectiveness of mentoring, what we find is that there are many studies that show that mentoring is related to positive or better youth outcomes for youth, better academic performance and school-related problems, gains in self-perception, confidence, and self-esteem, stronger social support, stronger peer support and acceptance, reductions in delinquency, aggression, substance use, and other delinquent types of behavior. But then there are other studies that show that mentoring is not effective at all or has very low effect sizes on these outcomes. So when we look at meta-analysis, which are studies that really look at all the studies combined and try to estimate how big of an effect mentoring has on youth outcomes, what we find is that in general, mentoring has a small to moderate effect on youth outcomes. But when a program is better implemented, there tends to be better outcomes, larger and sometimes very large outcomes. And this is especially true for our systems involved youth. Those programs that are more successful are programs that recruit mentors that understand the cultural backgrounds, lived experiences, and effects of systems involvement on the lives of the youth that they serve. They match mentees with mentors who can keep them engaged and build strong relationship bonds, and they provide mentors with training and tools that are necessary to help mentees change specific behaviors that change programs, specific behaviors that the program seeks to change. At the Governor's Prevention Partnership, we have a commitment to helping mentoring programs develop strong programming and services for system involved youth. We have had a couple strong initiatives that deal with systems involved youth, including the Juvenile Justice Mentoring Network, which was founded by the Governor's Prevention Partnership to support mentoring programs contracted with the Court Support Services Division of the Judicial Branch, and Mentoring Now, which is a project that is funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention to serve or to examine youth-initiated mentoring and enhanced family engagement services to provide mentoring for systems involved or at-risk youth. And together we have between 200 and 300 youths that we have looked at and matched in the last 2 to 3 years. What we find about systems involved youth, the profile of systems involved youth across the country, the majority of them are minority youth are overrepresented in the juvenile justice system, and as well as in the mentoring programs that serve these youth. Nationally, African American youth have the highest rates of involvement compared to other racial groups. 30% of court referrals compared to 16% of the general population of adolescents are African American. And we find similar profiles when we look at mentors served by the programs in Connecticut. This graph, this pie chart here shows you some of the statistics from our Juvenile Justice Mentoring Network data from July 2017 to December 2020. I know that the legend is cut a little bit, but the 33% are African American males, 17% are African American females, 19% are Latinx males, and 13% were Latinx females. The point being that the majority of the youth that were served are people of color or youth of color. But there are other characteristics that they also have. Systems involved youth tend to live very complicated lives because of their involvement with the child welfare and juvenile justice systems. They often have a lot of people in their lives that youth who are not involved with the systems don't have. They have social workers, they may have foster parents, juvenile probation officers, lawyers, and other service providers. They often come from families that have experienced disruptions. They often have school challenges. The systems involved youth are 3 times more likely to be in special education compared to other youth their age. They have greater exposure to community-related issues like poverty, exposure to violence, substance use in their communities. As a result of these experiences, they also exhibit a lot of trust issues, and this is critically important for mentors and mentoring programs. Many a youth have been betrayed and let down by adults in their life multiple times, and as a result, it takes skill to really engage them in a mentoring relationship and build that bond. We also find that among the systems involved, if we look at the juvenile justice system, for instance, 13 to 15% of the youth are LGBTQ or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, queer, or questioning youth, compared to 5 to 7% of the general population. And what that means is for a mentor working with a systems involved youth, there is the possibility, a greater possibility, that they may be mentoring a youth who is questioning their sexual or gender identities, again, requiring different skill set. But one of the most dramatic stats on this population has to do with mental health and trauma exposure. Studies indicate that 70% of the youth in the juvenile justice system have emotional or behavioral health issues. 95%, an estimate, get that, 95% have been exposed to at least one potentially traumatic effect. And if you talk about girls exposed to the juvenile justice system, studies suggest almost 100%. have been exposed to at least one traumatic event. In some studies indicate that it's not just one traumatic event. On average, it's about 7. So let that sink in, the exposure to trauma that we're talking about. So not all adolescents who've been exposed to trauma actually have a diagnosis or could potentially have a diagnosis of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, because some people cope. Some people cope for a while, some people cope and then something triggers them. But the rates of prevalence of post-traumatic stress disorder among systems involved youth are much higher than in the general population. 30%, it's estimated that 30% have potentially have a post-traumatic stress disorder. And I say potentially because these are studies based on screening tools that are meant to estimate how many have the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. That's compared to 4 to 7%, 4 to 7% in the general population. So trauma is again, a big issue among this population, and one that mentors and mentoring programs have to be aware of and address. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Troy to moderate the discussion with our panelists. And I apologize, Troy. I jumped in and introduced you a little bit early. I seem to have picked up the wrong PowerPoint when I started. And so, Troy, would you like to take over for me from this point?
Thank you very much, Joe. And I hope everyone can hear me. If not, please put a hand up and we'll make sure that you can hear me for the presentation. And Joe, I appreciate you giving me the introduction earlier on, as well as introducing my my panelists or our panelists. I do want to add one other thing to my introduction to give a little bit more context. I've mentored several youth or many youth over the years. My first beginning with the mentoring a young person was in early 2000, probably back in 2004, 2005, somewhere along there. And it was a very valuable experience for me. I'm glad to say that my last 2 mentors that I had for over 4 or 5 years, allowing them from middle school all the way to the end of high school for us to complete our match and still have contact with them moving forward. So I do believe in mentoring. I think it's a great opportunity for young folks to be exposed to positive role models and devices within our society that can help them be successful adults as they get older. There are 3 areas that I want to focus on with our panel discussion. Joe gave us a lot of context, a lot of things that we should take in consideration as we talk about how do we go about mentoring juvenile justice involved youth. But 2 of those areas are, what do we do for youth who have been exposed to trauma exposed youth? Another one is, how do we go about, or what's the best method to mentor youth of color? Because we know that their race and ethnicity may impact how the mentoring and how the mentor and the mentoree engagement is going to look like. And then I want to jump into talking about the recruitment, the training that goes into training our mentors to be prepared, as well as some training for our case coordinators who are overseeing the cases. And then lastly, what can we do to bolster or improve the match support? And so our panelists are individuals who all have some expertise in the areas of the questions that I'm going to ask. We have Landry, who's the director of Guilford Youth and Family Services, here with us today. We have Huggins, who is the Youth Development Manager for the City of New Haven, the Youth and Recreation Department. We have Patricia Nicolari, the Mentoring Director for Children's Community Programs out of New Haven. We have Stephan, the Chief Executive Officer of Youth on Fire from Hartford. And lastly, we have Sergeant Ryan Bissett from Waterbury. He's oversees or involved in the Police Activity League, or PAL. And so all of these individuals are here to help us explore and answer some of the questions that I would like to pose. So I want to first start off with the recruitment of mentors. And I'm going to ask this question and ask any of our panelists to feel free to jump in answering this question. And this is a very basic question. And so I'll start off, what do we need to take into consideration when recruiting mentors who are going to be capable? These mentors have to be capable of engaging youth who have experienced trauma or trauma exposure. So what should we take in consideration as we try to identify mentors to work with youth who may have been engaged with trauma or trauma exposure in their lifetime? Who would like to jump in? All right, I'm gonna go with Ronald and I'm gonna go with Lynn.
Good morning, everyone. For me, I think it's key to identify that trauma for everyone is different. And the way people internalize and deal with trauma is different. So I can speak from a Black perspective. For us, we're seeing as trust God, lean on your faith, you'll work through it. And the thought of really sitting down with a professional sometimes, sitting down with someone who is a social worker or a clinician that may be able to give you additional tools to work through it, sometime in our community is shunned upon. And so I think it's important when dealing with trauma and dealing with young people who have experienced trauma, it's important to realize that trauma is different for every young person. The way they deal with that trauma is different for every young person. And so you have to go into each situation with a young person, flipping a new page and being able to allow yourself to get to their level and see it without any biases. See it from their level, put yourself in their shoes and in their position.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, yes, go ahead, Patricia.
If I may piggyback off of Ron, and Ron is one of the mentors in my mentoring program as well, and he does an amazing job. He's taken on 3 or 4 kids. But I think the concept credible messenger is very critical. Somebody who's been there, who's experienced it, somebody who could relate to the youth, and they may have overcome these challenges themselves. And somebody who looks like them. As a white woman in her 60s, most of my mentors are young Black males, and I'm proud of that because I could bring to the table people who look like the kids that I'm servicing and people who could best address overcoming their trauma when they were young.
Thank you, Patricia. So what I think I'm hearing from both you and Ron is if you're going to find a mentor who is going to be best able to work with a young person who has experienced trauma, either in the past or have been exposed to some trauma, you need to find someone who has some credibility, who has some lived experience that may be similar to theirs with respect to trauma, the type of trauma that they may have seen. And you will be looking for that type of individual as you try to recruit individuals to come on board. Perfect. I want to go to Lynn and then I want to go to Ryan because I saw those hands up. Yes, Lynn.
Thanks, Troy. So I want to speak a little bit about clinical experience because I think that has to play a role in it as well. So you may not get somebody who's lived that same kind of trauma, but I think you need somebody who's trained. And of course, speaking from a clinical perspective. So somebody who's trained, who is a trained therapist, who can understand some of these things. So that's to throw the card of a strong educational foundation on the table as well. So you could live it, and that would be my first choice for a mentor. But if I had a second choice, I would go with somebody who's had some very intense clinical training to offer that perspective.
Perfect. So Lynn, I would agree with you. I think someone who had that experience, that training, that education would be great. But how often do we actually get mentors who actually have that experience with them?
Right. Right. You would have to have a mentor who's also, a licensed social worker or, a psychiatrist, licensed professional counselor. You would hope that some of those people would become mentors.
All right.
They would be good people to recruit.
So at some point in this conversation, if not today, in the future, we have to figure out, well, how do we get access to those individuals to encourage them to become mentors? I know we have always talked about finding mentors of color, right? And how we go out and find them. But now we should be talking about how do we find mentors with the skill, experience, or education to work best with that population. And if we can't find them, which is a high possibility at this moment, how do we prepare our mentors who don't have those education and skill to be able to engage youth who have been exposed to trauma?
Well,
Sure,
then training.
Training. And we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that next. Ron, I just need you to jump in for a quick second because I want to get to Ryan because he had his hand up. Go ahead.
Yep, sure. And I think it's critical to allow your mentors to be as open, honest, and transparent as possible. Allow them to show their wounds. You know, so often we want to have them reserve and don't tell them this, don't expose that. Like, no, young people can tell if you're being real or not. Be
Agreed.
real. Keep it 100.
Yeah. That engagement requires some type of a relationship between the two, that honesty and candidness is there. So I agree with you, Ron. Thank you very much. Ryan, I know you had your hand up. You want to jump in on this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Troy, and everybody. Great comments so far. I just wanted to add to the commentary here with the Waterbury Police Activity League under the umbrella of the Waterbury Police Department, our community relations program. Many of our mentors are also school resource officers, and all of our school resource officers here in Waterbury are actually minority officers that still live in the same neighborhoods that most of them grew up in and attended the same schools. So we have a unique situation where these officers can clearly relate to the kids that they're serving. And then when they're done with school, they come to PAL to help mentor those individuals. And a great example is today with the snowstorm that we had, we have a shovel brigade program. So the cops are not in school, the kids are not in school, they come to PAL, they go out in vans, and they help shovel out elderly residents in the community and build informal mentoring relationships throughout the day. So utilizing round pegs and round holes, people that can relate, people that have experiences, life experiences, and those characteristics to work with these kids is I think, key to all of this.
Oh, that sounds great. You know, so what Ryan just said piggybacks on what Patricia had said earlier. You know, you got to find someone who has some credibility, that credible messenger, and all of the examples that Ryan just gave of the school resource officers who live in that same community or neighborhood. That's a credible messenger. But on top of that, because they're school resource officers, they probably have received some type of training in trauma or trauma exposure or basic trauma or vicarious trauma. I'm making an assumption, and therefore that's a skill set that they can use when they're engaging these young mentees.
Exactly, Troy. I don't have the information with me on all the training they receive, but these individuals do receive a lot of training with the work that they do, and they're put into the positions that they are because they want to do those jobs. They want to get back. They want to serve kids. They want to work with youth and help youth. They're not assigned there because it's their position for the day, but it's something that they seek out the opportunity because they have a desire for that kind of work.
Great. So I want to go on to the next question. It's very similar to the first question I asked, but I want to focus on following up with the context that Joe has given us earlier, that youth of color are overrepresented in the juvenile justice system. And as a result, many of the folks that we're going to be mentoring are going to be youth of color. And so my question is, what do we need to consider when we recruit mentors who can engage youth of color or youth of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds? What should we consider as we try to engage and bring on those mentors to work with that population? Who would like to comment on that? Stephan.
I think one of the things that we need to consider has already been spoken on, and that's lived experience, as well as training. We have a gentleman named Kim West that we brought on. Kim had run-ins when he was younger, but as he got older, he changed his life around, got active in the community, and he was always looking for a way to give back, but he never knew how to get training. He never knew how to approach the correct people to get put in position to work with the youth. The last year, Kim has worked with over 75 youth in Hartford on the North End. He's taken the training, several trainings. He's getting ready to take more trainings through the governor's prevention program coming up on the 24th and 25th. I think the first step is actually reaching out to the community. We have able people in the community that want to work with the kids, but because they have records from when they were 14, 15 years old, they don't believe that they can. So going out, doing small workshops, letting people know what mentors are, what they can do, the capacity that they can have on a young child's life. You meet people. Our first thing is we allow these people to intern. You intern for 2 months. If we can see your passion, your heart, and you really want to do this work, we sign you up for the training. Once you finish your training, we give you your first mentor. You are shadowed for the first month. You're a winter mentor, and then you're a mentor on your one. You can do one-on-ones, you can do groups, but I believe the first step is actually giving a person a chance to show that they want to be a mentor. Once they show you they want to be a mentor, then you allow yourself to be the GPS to put them on that path to working with the children.
So so thank you, Steve and Stephan. What I think I'm hearing you saying is it's not really for us to focus really on the race or ethnic diversity of the youth, but really we should be trying to identify mentors who want to mentor young people and then allow us to address the youth, race or ethnicity afterwards. And it sounds like you're saying that it can be bolstered or supported by future trainings to assist with that cultural identity of that young person.
Well, a lot of parents, especially in the north end of Hartford, first thing they say is, well, you know, my kid's gotten in trouble with the law. My kid just came home. How can you help me with their probation? Okay, to go back to Cam again, well, you know, when Cam was 15, he was on probation for 1.5 years. He finished his probation. He passed all his urines. We can put Cam with your child and they can work one-on-one. The reason they'll work good one-on-one is because Cam's been there. He's lived it. He's worked in the court system, good and bad. He knows where the child is coming from. He knows what the child fears. And he's also been a kid who doesn't want to disappoint their parent at an early age. So getting someone that's been through those steps allows a child, once they get through that icebreaker stage, to let down their walls and actually have a conversation with their mentor. You know, this is what I'm going through. I came home. This is what my parents are putting me through, but nobody's actually listening to what I want now that I'm home, or now that I want to change my life. Nobody's paying attention. It's, I got to do what the court says. I got to do what my mom says. But when you have that mentor that's taken those steps already, they can sit down with that mentee and say, okay, you know what? Let me know what you want to do, and I can try to guide you, and I can hold a conversation with your mom, or you know what? I can write a letter, and your mom can take it to your PO to let your PO know, you know what? I want to do what the court says, but I also want to do these things in the community to try to help other kids. Training is great, but lived experience goes an extra step. That icebreaker to tell a kid, you know, oh, you got arrested for that. I got arrested for that too when I was younger. Allows that kid to actually step back and look at you like, what? I thought you was a square. I thought you was a suit. You was somebody that was just going to report on me. Now they can go home and be like, yo, you know, my mentor actually got arrested for the same thing I did. And now he's a mentor. He's working in the city. That's a thing a lot of kids relate to and need.
I agree with you. And, you know, we heard that from Ryan and we heard that from Patricia very early on, that lived experience, individuals from that neighborhood, that's significant. It sounds like you're going to have to figure out a way to replicate Cam so that he can join many of the mentoring programs and individuals who have mentoring programs who are attending this session. And so I'm sure you're probably already thinking about how to replicate Cam. And so he can have 70 individuals in Hartford, but we need about, I don't know, give me about another 1,000 Cams to spread out across the state of Connecticut. That would be great. I want to go into a question, and this is my last one on recruitment, because I want to hear your thoughts on this one. And it is it important to recruit or match mentors with the same cultural backgrounds as the youth that they're going to mentor? Is it important to match mentors who will be mentoring youth of the same backgrounds? And so if you're Black or you're Latino, etc., is that important? And if so, why? If not, then why not? Ron, I see you ready to jump in. Go ahead.
So here's my thought. I won't say it's important to do it necessarily by race, but I do think it's important to do it by experience, right? If you know, because the reality is white, Black, brown, we all go through stuff. Right. But if you can, you know, for example, if there's a Hispanic that's been shot and you know, you have a white mentee that is, you know, now toting guns and putting itself in those type of positions, I don't necessarily got to team up with somebody white. I'm going to team up with somebody that, as a result of their action, suffers something negative. So I think it's important to do it by experience and not necessarily by race or gender and stuff like that.
Got it. Thank you very much. I want to go to Patricia because I think she may have a thought on this, and then I want to go to Lynn.
I do have a thought on this, Troy. Thank you. I think it's really important to give kids choices and say, what type of mentor seems like a good fit for you? You know, because we put that through the training as well for the mentors. Would you feel a person of the same race is good for you, or the same ethnicity? Well, it has to be the same gender, but I think most kids want somebody who looks like them, because it's just the unspoken connection that is made without having to say anything else. And another part, GPP, they're always cutting edge. I like, you know, right now we have an advisory board addressing LGBTQ youth in the mentoring program. And as your stat showed before, it's very prevalent in the JJ system as well. So I have many youth who are matched with mentors who are also trans and GLBTQ in the community. That's really important. It's an unspoken support system right then and there.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're starting off by saying, you know, I want to give the kids a choice, but it definitely is important to match them with someone that they can easily and readily identify with. And sometimes that might be another transgender adult, or it might be an adult of a Latino background or West Indian background, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, thank you. Lynn, your thoughts on this?
Well, it gets a little difficult in Guilford because we're probably 95% white. So, you know, so you're usually matching a white kid with a white mentor. I wish that it were different. I spent 20 years of my career working in inner city New Haven, running psychiatric programs. So I wish that there was more cultural diversity here in Guilford that I experienced 20 years of my career. You know, the devil's advocate side to that is, what about opening mentors and mentees' eyes to different races, cultures, and experiences? You know, so there's a flip side to that. You can match them up, you know, or you can expose them to something that's a little different and open their eyes. Like I wish I could open a lot more eyes in Guilford.
Got it. So there is some advantages, potential advantages to allowing a mentor to match with someone of a different racial or ethnic background.
Right. You know, and it makes them, like, maybe it'll make you question your own biases, you know, and address them. And right now, when we're supposed to be addressing systemic racism, I think it's an important point to look at our own biases and start addressing them.
Yeah. I hear you. Thank you very much for your comments on that. You know, I'm still, just personally, I'm still struggling with what's the best method for doing a match, right? And the part of the struggle is it's having a mentor who may do something that may offend the mentee or the mentee's family without them even knowing it. And so that kind of stuff can happen, especially if I'm working with a transgender youth and I may say something, have no idea that that was offensive to that transgender youth, or working with a mentor of a Latin or background and say something that was offensive to that individual. And so I want to get into training. All right. And so my question is, so how can we train our mentors to work with these populations that they may not be familiar with, or that they may be a part of and still say something offensive? So I can be a Black person mentoring another Black youth and still not have an understanding of how to connect, engage that person, and not offend that person or their family, because I just assume that I know their experiences because of the color of my skin. What are your thoughts on that? Training mentors to work with these populations of different races and ethnicities.
I do this all the time. I've been training mentors for 10 years, and it's almost hard to train for the unexpected, you know, so we can do individual case scenarios and how would you respond to this situation? And it's interesting because in the training that we're going through with Joe Hawke and then True Colors training is, you know, we're giving situations where the mentor might say something inappropriate, and we train the mentors, okay, give me an example of how you would respond in this situation. Anybody else want to jump in on that? Ron, I know you've gone through the trainings, and tell me more.
I I like what you put out so far, Patricia. I think using active scenarios and having our mentors actually respond to them is a good way for them to learn how to engage with the youth of the different cultural backgrounds. So I really do like that. Ron, did you want to jump in?
No, I was just gonna say, I think Patricia, you summed it up well.
All right. So here's my question. I mean, I was a mentor. I know when I started back in the early 2000. I remember my first session as becoming a mentor. It wasn't very long. It was an evening, maybe it was an hour and a half, and I didn't do another training for several months again before that happened. How long do these training sessions need to be for me to have enough skills where I can appropriately engage that mentor of a different racial background or ethnic background or a transgender or LGBT background?
So Troy, I think for me, I think there's but so much you can get in training. So yes, I believe that training is important. I believe that it's critical, but I also believe that you need that real life experience. So, after being trained with a young person with a specific background that may be new or different than what you're used to dealing with, I think actually being put in a position where you have to use that training actually help, because it's like a muscle. You can have the muscle, but if you don't train it and work it and actually put it to use, it's pointless.
I hear you, and I hear you, and I agree. But I'm still trying to get a sense of how much training initially before they start using that muscle and get experience. How much training should they get? And I asked the question specifically because our trainers are usually our mentors are volunteers. They have full-time jobs. They have full lives. So how much of that can I take from them to engage them so they can be prepared to work with kids of different racial and ethnic minority groups, kids who are experienced trauma, right? All these things that I want my mentor to be prepared to engage when the time comes. Well, Patricia, I know you want to say something as well.
Yes, initially we go through a 2 or 3 hour training, depending on the amount of experience a person has. Like I trained Ron, Ron doesn't need all that experience. He's in the field. But, and then after that, we offer ongoing trainings because we have a built-in foster care program with our agency. And every month there's a different presenter. So we invite well, this was pre-COVID, but now it's Zoom, but we invite the mentors to join in on that. So it could be trauma informed. It could be about gangs. It could be about racial tension, all different topics, sex trafficking, and, life is ongoing lessons. I'm also available 24/7. So if a mentor has an issue, I get a call on a Sunday night at 9:30. I'm in this situation. How do I handle it? It could be the most educated mentor, but they don't have life experience. They have the PhD experience. So they need that support.
Got it. And so Ryan has a hand up. Yes, Ryan.
I'm just going to comment on our end. Being affiliated as a chapter of National PAL, we do get a lot of support from their mentoring program, and they provide a virtual program for our mentor coordinator that we're able to hire to oversee our programming, along with a different type of training that all the mentor candidates go through, along with the thorough application process. And then again, I piggyback on the question I answered before that, a lot of, besides the training, a lot of thought process goes into the selection of the individuals and their experience and what they do and how it would relate to the outcome of the program that we have. We also, with our connection with the police department, had a local nonprofit come in and had a clinical social workers do a session with the police mentors on some types of trauma, things that you might experience with kids and expectations and how you can overcome some of these obstacles when they become mentors.
And if I may piggyback off of Ryan, we have the New Haven Police Department. I trained 15 of them as mentors as well. And I used to have all the PALS Police Department as well. So I so appreciate the men and women in blue stepping up to the plate to work with kids. I think it's proactive, which is awesome. So I appreciate what you do, Ryan.
Thank you, Patricia. I'd love to connect with you also.
Sounds great.
Thank you very much. Joe, I know there's a couple things going on in the chat. I know you put some stuff in the chat as well. If there's a question that I should ask, because folks are asking, let me know. I want to first go to Stephan first, who had a hand up. Stephan.
For me, answering your question of when do they get to flex that muscle of the training, we've incorporated an internship. While they're doing the ongoing training and workshops, we allow mentors to come in for 1 month. They set their hours for that month, and they shadow a mentor that's already working with the youth. During that month, they do get hands-on experience. They get to work with the mentor, work with the youth, and it allows them to actually put their training into practice. So when they do get put into groups or do get put into one-on-ones, they actually know how to follow protocol, what to do, how to react to a situation. They know how to read the children. Because one of the skill sets that's needed as a mentor is how to read your mentee. Each mentee comes from a different background, different area in the city. They're raised different. I have to go back to the kids in the north end of Hartford. They're raised on PSTD. Going to school, they see there's trauma. Going home, there's trauma. Going to the store, there's trauma. So before you can say a kid is out of control or just has a mental issue, you have to understand where that child came from. So learning how to read a child as a mentor, you get that from hands-on experience. You can't get that in the classroom. You can't get that through a Zoom training. That's hands-on experience. So that's why we do the internship for a month with each new mentor that we're bringing on, so that they can get that experience. And the mentor that's already in place and working with them, they meet with them at the end of the month, and you kind of give them a little rough quiz and see how much they picked up on the one-on-ones or in the group sessions during their internship.
Got it. Stephan, when you talk about these mentors, are you talking about full-time mentors, or are you talking about volunteers like myself from, I work 9 to 5. So how am I going to get into this internship? Am I doing this on weekends, after hours?
Well, we have 4 full-time mentors, and then we have volunteers. Our volunteers get to set their hours. Some mentors do about 20 hours a month. Some do more than that. Depending on what hours you pick for your set times during that month, that's when we work with you, whether on the weekend, weekdays, whether we're doing a community event, whether we're doing a Zoom event. We take the time to actually work with each of our volunteers. That's the only way you're going to get them trained. That's the only way you're going to get them ready to go into the field.
Troy, I need to interrupt.
Yep, I'm seeing the time.
The conversation is really great. We have about 1 minute left. So there's never enough time. I think that you get a lot of people in the room with great ideas, and you talk about something like mentoring that is very complex. It's a longer conversation is needed. So I will turn it to you. You've got a minute to kind of wrap it up.
Not a problem. So I appreciate all the feedback that I've heard from all my panelists. I know there's a lot of questions. I'll start off with Stephan and say, I'm really glad to hear how you develop your mentors. You spend time by running internships and meeting them where they are, having them contact you. I think I heard the same from Patricia as well, that she's available in evening times to respond to mentees' questions or concerns, whether it be about a racial or a trauma or an LGBT issue. You guys are there, because I think the point that I'm hearing from all that is training and skill development is a large part of getting a good mentor. And one of the points that I think needs to be stressed is it can't happen in a 1-hour session. All right. It takes multiple sessions. And then on top of that, you have to do what Ron has emphasized, and that is you have to get real experience. And so that's why I like that internship component that you mentioned there before as well. With that being said, I didn't get a chance to talk about match support, because I wanted to talk about, I did want to get into, it's not just training the mentors, but what do we need to do to train our match coordinators? We'll have to save that for another time, Joe.
Yeah, we got a series going on. I can feel it. I would like to thank everyone for thank you, Tori, for stepping in and moderating the discussion, and for our panelists for providing their input, and for everyone, my panelists, my moderator, and everyone else on the call. We have in the chat a link that you can click on and get you to where you have the options for those sessions that are upcoming. We got a couple, two really good sessions. One on the vets program, talk about a really grounded program. It's matching veterans who've been honorably discharged with mentees. And so that might be something of interest. We also have, and this really follows very well from our plenary today, we have a session on natural mentors, harnessing everyday mentoring. So those mentors that aren't necessarily through a program, but just come into a kid's life. So we have that, and then we have our closing. So please stick with us, you know, get into the next session, and thank you again for participating today. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists, each and every one of you.
Thanks, Joe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.